2025 meeting of the Planning Commission to order. The first thing on the agenda is the approval of the agenda. Does anybody have any proposed changes to the agenda? No. If nobody else does, I do have a proposed change, which is to move number 8, consideration of the September 22nd meeting up to number 3, which is right after the approval of this agenda. It's never made sense to me that we approve old meetings minutes at the end of the meeting. I think we should just get it done as a ministerial task at the beginning. So I'll make that proposal.
Is it a motion?
Yeah, look for a motion, I guess.
Okay, I can make a motion to move agenda item number 8 to number 3.
And I will second that.
All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Any nays? No? Okay. So that motion was just to move the agenda item. So I'll do this I'll ask for unanimous consent. Unless there's any other proposed changes, I'd ask for unanimous consent to approve the agenda. Hearing no comments, the agenda is approved as amended. So comments from the chair. I'm not the chair, so I won't make any comments. Well, I'm sorry. I apologize. We just moved the approval of September 22nd meetings to the next agenda item. So let's consider the September 22nd meeting minutes. And does anybody have any proposed corrections or changes to the meeting minutes?
Did we not have any public comment? I believe we didn't. So I'm just trying to remember.
I don't remember any.
I don't believe we did.
Yeah,
No.
I know Steve wasn't in attendance, so I think that probably
Right.
militates towards no public comment.
I will move to approve the agenda from September 22nd, 2025.
I have a second.
Do you need me to say?
I just need a second.
Oh, I wasn't there, so but I guess I can.
I'll second.
Thanks, Sean. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any nays? Nope. The minutes are approved. Next is comments from the chair. Again, I'm not the chair, so I won't make any comments at this point. Next item on the agenda is general business. This is comments from the public about anything not on the agenda. Is there anybody here in attendance that would like to speak to anything at the meeting that's not on the agenda as listed? Nope.
There are 2 people online.
Oh, and we have some folks online, just to see if anybody online has anything. You can either speak up or use the hand raise function. Okay, I don't see anything from anybody. So we will move on to the next agenda item, which is the election of chair and vice chair. Ariane Kissam was the chair as she attended her last meeting last month. She is no longer here with us. So, and I am neither the chair nor the vice chair, but I'm just acting as one. So I guess I'll just open it up for discussion amongst the group if there's any the word escapes me. Nominations. There we go. Nominations for chair and or vice chair.
I think I'll just say that I think we came to some a conclusion for chair last time. Did we discuss vice chair? And Maria has been vice chair. Is Maria staying on as vice chair? I don't recall us discussing that last time.
I don't think we discussed it as a full group. We just spoke to the.
Maria is now on.
I'd be happy to.
Hi, Maria. are you
make nominations, but
willing and able to stay on as a vice chair?
No, we don't have you.
No, no sound, even though you're unmuted.
Oh.
Yeah, I don't know. Yes, yes, you
You
can
would
be
be willing.
president, vice chair.
Okay.
There we go.
excellent.
Thank you.
I guess that was
Well-
what we needed, a thumbs up or a thumbs down.
Can I make a full motion for nomination for chair and vice chair, or shall I do them? Should we do them separately?
I think given where we are, both would probably be fine.
Then I will make a motion for our chair to be Aaron and our vice chair to be Maria for the upcoming tenure.
I'll second that.
Great. All those in favor of having myself as chair and Maria as continuing on as vice chair, please say aye.
Aye.
Any nays? The ayes have it. We now have a new chair and
Congratulations.
continuing vice chair, and I humbly accept this position that no one else wants. So, and I will just say I will make a couple of comments. Just it's been working with Ariane was really great. I thought she did a very good job of sort of helping create foster an environment where a lot of voices were heard, and we were able to have really good, robust discussions about the issues that we were dealing with. And so I really will try to take her lead and continue to see if we can welcome. I'll do my best to help, welcome and encourage those really robust discussions that I think have served us really well so far. I guess the only other thing I would say is that I will. Where I may differ going forward from other past chairs is that I want to try to run as efficient a meeting as possible. And if we can get out of here before 7:30, I will do everything in my power to get us out of here before 7:30 whenever we can. So I'll try to speak less and just, carry on the work as efficiently as we can. So thanks. The next item on the agenda is to continue work on new permanent zoning amendments, which is a review of, I guess we'll start with the review of Chapter 220, the overlay zoning districts. And I think I'll hand it over to Mike
Yep.
and Meredith to sort of speak to those things. And I guess the other thing but is there, as part of this review, as you give it to us, I think it's always helpful, at least to me, before you start to give these presentations, is to let us know if there's any sort of specific feedback or decision that you want to hear from us as you're giving this presentation. It's always good to know if there's something actionable that you have in mind. I have a feeling the answer is no at this point, but
Yeah,
if that
no,
makes
so we don't,
sense.
there's no, nothing at this point. This is, so for everybody's background, the planning commission has started to undertake a zoning review. And so the first thing, other than Aaron and maybe Gabe was a part of some of them, most of the planning commission was not involved in the big zoning update that took place up through 2018, and then the design review regulations that were amended in about 2020-ish. So a lot of new board members. And so what we're trying to do is to go through the city plan, or go through the zoning and really kind of explain what all the pieces are and how they all fit together, because we need to make some functional amendments to the regulations to help them run more efficiently. And everybody kind of needs to know how all these pieces work in a 300-page document. So we're trying to go through beginning to end so the commissioners have an understanding, and also we'll highlight areas where we have made notes of things that should change, whether it's things from the public that we've heard or committees, or if you're on the DRC, if there are things that we're like, we always get hung up on this piece. And if we had some clarity of that, that would make our jobs easier. And that's whether it's DRC, DRB, and understanding the background. So, big picture, that's what we're doing. And tonight we're talking about the design review regulations. And so trying to make sure that the public and the planning commission has a good understanding of what is the design review overlay district. Why does it exist? What are we trying to accomplish? What are the pieces that they need to know? So when they hear public comment that says this is stopping development, they've got some background that says, well, actually, we've talked to the DRC and the DRB and the Historic Preservation Commission, and this is what they have expressed. And so that's a little bit of why we're having this conversation, is to understand it and then to come up with ideas of how we can make things better, and to fix those things. And I'm going to turn it over to Meredith to kind of give an explanation of what are the details of the design review district, just because she's far more familiar with it. But again, just kind of an overview, and then we can either take comments or questions or input from the boards and questions from the planning commission.
Okay. So, for everybody who's on, Meredith Crandall, zoning administrator. And I'm gonna share my screen because it has some of the mapping on it. I'm actually gonna pull up the city plan because I think that one is the easiest one to see the design review district aspects and how those work in with everything else. So if people do have detailed questions, I'm happy to go into this. I'm gonna try and keep this as sort of high level as possible at this stage. Yeah. Yep. This is just me mostly talking off my head. So the design review district overlay is the only overlay district that the city has adopted so far. This is a layer of regulations that
Claire, you're showing the historic district.
I know
Okay.
that work with and are sort of an addendum to the standard zoning regulations. So if someone is in the design review overlay district, they have to comply with all the regular design, zoning regulation requirements that apply. And they also have to meet the pertinent design review regulations. What I'm showing on the map right now is the orange outline is the National Register Historic District for the city of Montpelier. And then the pink that's in there at the moment is the designated downtown. You can see how these don't exactly match each other, but they have sort of a similar context focused on the downtown. I'm going to scroll down and you're going to get layered in the design review district. So now the design review district is this darker pink area. I'm going to zoom in a little bit. And so it overlays all of this downtown area here now, stretches out partway here, out Berry Street and parts of Stonecutters Way. It also goes up to National Life. And there's pockets of it around certain areas that the city determined were unique enough or had enough of this kind of mixed development or special buildings where they wanted to layer that in as also having the design review overlay district. So area around Vermont College of Fine Arts campus area. And then there's also another pocket. Hold on. Where'd my other pocket go? Oh, I'm thinking of something else. But we've got, and it stretches up here behind the Capitol building. There is this green area here. This is an exclusion zone. So it's within the general bounds of the design review area, design review overlay district, but the state has jurisdiction on design review aspects in this block. It's by state statute. Design review doesn't apply there. Zoning does in general, with a lot of caveats, but not design review. So that's the sort of big picture area map. Most of these areas that are covered are commercial areas, or mixed use areas, just generally speaking, as well as a lot of it is the historic structures and historic downtown. The regulations themselves are very detailed at this point. There are categories of regulations, and I think you can probably turn, I'm not going to scroll through them because it's just too much text. You can turn the lights on. Thanks, Mike. There are some very general standards that apply to almost any project that happens in the design review overlay district. Then there are some that apply only if it's a project involving a historic structure. Then there are some that only apply to new development in the design review overlay. There's also some very specific things for, say, signs, specific standards to signs, no matter what kind of building they're on. But they're really broken out. So when somebody comes to the planning department with a project, we look, if it's in the design review overlay district, we then filter down and guide them towards the very specific provisions that apply to their project. There are certain items that, since the most recent version of these was adopted, there are certain items that can be administratively approved, even though they're in the design review overlay district and have something that triggers that design review, some exterior change. But those are pretty limited for administrative review. Most projects that come in and have an exterior change on a structure or on a parcel that triggers design review needs to go to the design review committee, because most of these things are not black and white items. And so there's, committee, they take a look at this, the matter, and then look at those very specific standards that come into play. Is it going to switch? No, it's not. And I can, if you want, I can just give you one example of a standard. So say for, this is something that applies to all projects. That there's one that says that, sorry, I need to make this smaller. Location and appearance of utilities, mechanical equipment, trash storage, and fencing needs to be cited to minimize adverse visual impact or adequately and appropriately screen from public view. So really sort of basic thing for those kinds of items in the design review district. And that comes into play whether it's a big project or a little project. So if somebody's coming in with some new trash location, we require that it be screened, basically. And then if, say, there's, a historic structure, there's going to be more of a look as to the specific details on that building. What kind of, framing do they have around their windows, things like that. That's when those kind of details really come into play, where they want things to match. If it's a new structure, that's not quite as much of an issue. There it's a lot more open and free form as to what fits those design review standards. But there's a lot of detail in there, and I'm happy to discuss that if you want. And yes, design review is exterior only, not getting into the inside. They provide their comments, their recommendations, either to myself if it's an administrative permit, or to the development review board if it's an application that needs to go through their review.
At what point would something go through both the DRC and the DRB? So if it goes through the DRC and they recommend that it then goes to the DRB, or are there other factors that send it to both?
So there has to be an aspect to the project that triggers that development review board review. So either it's changes to a building that are associated with a conditional use, so it has to go to the board. It's a brand new big building that's triggered major site plan review. And so then, and most of the time, this has happened in my time here, like over 7 years now.
Mhm.
If the design review committee has made a recommendation, and a recommendation that's strict enough of saying this is how you need to comply with one of these requirements. Once it gets to the development review board, most of the time the development review board is gonna just accept that.
Mhm.
There's been one appeal of a design review recommendation on a sign that went to the development review board for review
Mhm.
in my time here. And the development review board actually like stepped back and overwrote what the design review committee recommended, but usually that doesn't come into play. Usually in these design review committee meetings, and when I've been here, it's a discussion. And there's a form that the design review committee chair fills out. If they've made a recommendation, it's on there. And the applicants can sign off that they agree with the recommendation, and then it just moves forward. That's usually what happens. And a lot of the times there aren't recommendations, there's options. Design review committee makes suggestions that
Mhm.
aren't binding. They're just saying, hey, we'd be happy to see either X or Y, your choice.
And please excuse my ignorance. So when it goes to DRC,
Mhm.
and let's say there are recommendations, then what is the process? I'm just thinking about, is it still within sort of administrative approval?
If it's an administrative permit, yeah, most of them are. So they make recommendations, and they're at that point making those recommendations to me as the zoning administrator as to what to layer in as a condition on the approval. And that's one of the only times an administrative permit would have conditions on it that aren't just, hey, you have to comply with X provision. That, more of a reminder so that people are aware of it, because sometimes people forget that aspect. But
Mhm.
no, it's a recommendation to me as to what to layer in as a condition.
Okay. Let me hand up over here.
Has a comment.
Just wondering
Oh.
if you could crank up the volume a little bit
Oh,
on that. I can't hear everything you're saying.
yeah.
I can definitely speak up some more. Again, another ignorant question. I apologize.
Yeah, I've been doing this.
This is new to me.
Okay. Yeah, that's why
Yeah, okay, great.
that's why I invited all of them.
Excellent. So I'm curious about any sort of public appeal. Is that at a DRB level? Does that happen at a design review level as well, or no?
No. So could be they're administrative. They don't
Yeah.
authorize the permit. So they send their recommendations. If it's administrative, right, they would send their recommendations to me. I would issue the permit. So there's appealing the design review committee is a little funky. There's two options. Before I issue the permit, there's actually in the design review regulation standards, there's a sort of in-house appeal option where they can go straight up to the development review board and say, we disagree with the design review committee's recommendations. We want the DRB to weigh in. So that is sort of a sub appeal that's separate from the standard appeal process that would be after I issued a permit.
Okay.
So that's been worked in there because during the discussions of how this all works, they didn't want people to have to go through and like pay the recording fees for my permit and everything when we could know right at that design review committee meeting that there's disagreement.
Mhm.
So that if the disagreement is understood right away, they can then just come to me and say, hey, we want to get on the next development review board agenda that's available, and ask them to weigh in on what the design review committee has said. And at that point, the recommendation form, the meeting minutes are all evidence of what the design review committee has recommended to the DRB. And sometimes design review committee members might actually come to that meeting as
Mhm.
well. So that's one option. The other option is I issue the permit with the conditions and then it gets appealed. And that would, unless somebody was at the committee meeting, that would probably be the avenue for a neighbor that disagreed with
Yeah.
the recommendations. because the design review committee meetings, the agendas get posted, but that's not a matter that like all the abutting property owners get
Sure.
mailed notices or anything like that.
Got it.
I have a question. If somebody wants to demolish a building in the overlay district, how much say does the DRC have in saying they can't?
They don't really. So the design review standards, 2201 is their jurisdiction. So when I have had people submit applications in the design review overlay district for demo, it goes through the design review committee. But really what they're looking at is the post demo plan, right? The post demolition plan, whether it's grassing something over or it's, most of the ones I have had in the design review overlay district, because it is mostly the core of the downtown, there has already been a plan in place for what's happening next. And I think most of those have also been historic structures. So there's just this higher tier review for those anyway. So there have been plans. So what the design review committee looks at is what's your new plan? What's the new thing going in there instead? But they don't weigh in on whether or not the building gets demolished. That's a development review board decision if it's historic. And if it's not historic and hasn't otherwise triggered DRB review, then that's administrative.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions for Meredith?
I don't know. I think I just want to think out loud for a second. I don't really have a question yet, but when I was kind of reading through this chapter 220 stuff, what I had in mind was the feasibility of infill in this like overlay district, and I'm kind of noticing that portions of Berlin Street are in the overlay district, and that feels like there's been a lot of great conversions of, kind of adding to the housing market while still complying with the overlay district. Is there any feedback? So I guess my assumption is that all of this effort that's gone into the overlay zoning district is what has preserved the charm, the appeal, the beauty of downtown Montpelier that makes it what it is. Does that ever kind of butt up against development, infill type of stuff? Are they at odds? Kind of reading it, I see like we need to preserve the historic nature of the buildings, and if we add another building, my understanding is, it's differentiated from the old, but shall respect and be compatible with the, features of the old building. So anyways, I'm just kind of saying like, trying to think, oh, if I wanted to add some structures in this overlay district, there's a lot of things to comply with. And how is that received? And especially if there's other cities in Vermont that also have maybe something similar to this overlay district, and they are having these infill sort of development with success. Is there some lesson learned that we can figure out? Is this zoning overlay district an undue obstacle, like a hurdle that we can sort of discuss? And that's what we're kind of here to do, is identify any hurdles. Or is it working really well and it's working as designed? Yeah. So, you guys good with me addressing this real quick, and then the Historic Preservation Commission and Design Review Committee members might have something to weigh in. So one, in my 7 years here, we haven't had a whole lot of applications for new buildings in the Design Review Overlay District. Those that have come forward have been approved, whether they got built or not. And we know that the regulations themselves are pretty technical. And that's why one of the supplements to that, and a way to help understand that, are the design review guidelines. I'm going to just give you an example. So this is something that was developed by the Historic Preservation Commission, Montpelier's Historic Preservation Commission, with guidance and input from the Design Review Committee. So these are people who are, invested in a lot of this. And in the guidelines, there is discussion and illustrated information trying to show what is meant by here's one, designing new buildings to be compatible in height with existing buildings in the neighborhood. And there's images here. So, yeah, sorry. New buildings in existing neighborhoods. So here's an example of a new multi-story corner building, right, with a stepped down side here so that this section of the building is closer in height to an existing structure, right? They don't match. It's talking about, consideration, making sure that the structure as a whole is not massively dominating everything next to it. You have these adjustments to scale in parts of the building. Next to it is, this one where just this whole big structure is really significantly taller than this. This probably is something you wouldn't necessarily want to see as much because it is completely overwhelming, but maybe if it had sort of a step down a little bit more, it might have been a little closer to what they were looking at. This is one that's an example of something that is, potentially acceptable, right? This new building, completely new building right next to a church, features an elevator tower echoing the steeple tower. This was an example right down in White River Junction. So there's ways to do it, and there's a bunch of illustrated examples in these guidelines that we can point people to. And this guideline document is also there for Design Review Committee members to use as a resource if they're confused as to what a standard is meant to result in or how to apply it. These aren't regulations, these aren't rules, but they're a backup and an educational tool.
Yeah, that was just going to be my quick question to follow up. These guidelines, if I remember correctly, you might have just answered this, but is this meant to be for the committee members or for folks okay.
Both. It's for applicants when they're developing projects, as well as for Design Review Committee members when they are looking at a project and trying to determine, in this instance, what does compatible look like? What does respectful of existing structures look like? What are some examples, if I don't see in my head what that could mean?
And I don't know if any of the committee members that are here tonight, if you could speak to whether or not the committee tends to rely on these guidelines, and if so, to what extent. I remember when these were drafted, and this was a few years ago, and I think the committee, I can say, like, the planning commission as a whole, thought that was really helpful. I'm just curious.
We haven't had any big projects.
Okay. No,
they came up. So I'm just gonna.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, like, yeah, how effective they've been in guiding the committee's decision making and recommendations.
We haven't had big projects since then. It's been really frustrating. But yeah, we haven't had them.
I'm trying to think about what has been developed in this area in the past decade, let's say, and what comes to mind is maybe there's a 6-unit across from the co-op that was done maybe a while ago now.
Yeah, that would have been under old, much simpler design review regulations that really had no specifics to them. I mean, because that's
Yeah.
what it was like 3 pages
Okay.
when I came here. And honestly, any permits I issued using those regulations terrified me because I was like, I'm issuing this permit, but there's nothing to back up what the design review committee actually recommended.
So the district, how long has the district been around? Do we know?
1976.
A long time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The district's been around a
With-
long time.
Yeah.
Yeah, one microphone to the other, Mike or Eric, sorry.
I have more to say, but I really want to answer your question, and I think
Please.
I can do that with an example. Both the Historic Preservation Commission and Design Review offer a preliminary informal review, which is, I think, really helpful to people because they get to, get some idea what's going to happen, and there are people on the committee that often make good suggestions. But an example how the process works and fits into the guidelines is myself and another member of the Historic Preservation Commission met with the new owner of the Ascension Baptist Church on Elm Street, which they're proposing a housing development there. And I think he's planning on 20 units, is that right?
I haven't seen a formal proposal.
And anyway, we had an informal meeting with him, and there's a surprising amount remaining of the historic house as part of the streetscape there. And we talked with the developer, had quite a discussion with the developer, and the developer was very interested in the idea and is going to look at it of kind of saving the front of the facade of the house to preserve the streetscape. So I think the process, and just in today, I went through now how does that fit into the guidelines? There's a number of different ways it does, but in the end, any guidelines or statutes rely on human judgment, and everybody has their own idea. But I think the idea of having this informal approach before people actually avoids just turning a project down or approving a project that isn't quite ready yet. And it also avoids a lot of costs on the developer's part because they don't have to pay an architect or anybody to design something.
Just very quickly, in your experience, how often do applicants engage in that informal consultation process?
Not real often.
Okay.
I mean, it's not like an everyday thing, but it happened for this project. I can't remember the last one or when it was exactly. But it's just a kind of a service that both myself, I'm chair of the Historic Preservation Commission, and Steve, who is the chair of the Design Review Committee, both like that idea of kind of helping people through a project rather than just slamming it when it gets there.
And I guess to answer Tim's question, I mean, the two of the biggest projects that would come to mind, the transit center project and the approval of the parking garage. I mean, approval of a parking garage goes through design review and gets approved. So there's certainly elements that we get to go through that applicants have to go through, but at the end, it certainly doesn't stop projects and very different projects. I mean, Transit Center is not a historic looking building, but that's not what it's supposed to be. But some of those were under the old rules, but they still kind of came under.
I had another good example.
Okay.
Yeah.
The addition for the memory care unit on the back of the Gary home on Main Street, that's a historic structure, has a modern addition on the back, went through design review. Got approved with just some, suggestions on types of finishes on the outside and some comments here and there and, screening of equipment that was on the roof, things like that. But that got approved under all the modern regulations, the floodplain, the zoning, and the design review within the zoning.
Those examples are really helpful, kind of piecing it, together the words on the page to, you know, the examples of it actually being executed. So thank you.
Yeah, I think maybe my one concern, which is similar to the development review board as well, and just looking at the zoning regulations, when I see pieces of the zoning regulations that pop out to me as, well, that's of somebody's opinion. There's subjectivity that's built into these zoning regulations. And so from my perspective as just someone in Montpelier who wants to see new housing development, I sort of like cross my fingers and hope that the folks on the design review committee have a similar mindset, because they will be looking at the website for the guidelines. They'll be looking at the zoning regulations, and then making a somewhat personal, subjective decision when it comes to some of these issues. And I'll say, just for example, like the rhythm. There's the mention of rhythm within our zoning regulations. For me, that's a very subjective decision to make. Although maybe the guidelines give very good examples of what rhythm is.
And while Meredith is looking up her piece, I'll just go and say, so, you know, big picture, it's kind of goes for everybody. I mean, you have objective sets of rules and you have subjective sets of rules. And if everything were objective, we would have all administrative permits and not need any panels. You know, the big theory of the regulations is that you have the opportunity to have some subjective rules, and then you have a board of reasonable persons. And it, of course, requires that we have reasonable persons on our boards. And so far, my tenure here has been we've had very reasonable people on those boards and made good decisions. So,
Yeah.
But in order to have flexibility, you need to have a certain amount of subjectivity. To build that flexibility in, you need to give a little bit and bring it to a board and let a board of folks look at it and say, yeah, that's okay. But in the past, you know, Meredith generously said there were 3 pages of rules under the old rules. They're actually like 5 sentences. The rest of it was just the process. So the rules were literally like 1 sentence long. And it's like, you know, you can't do this. You know, it shall be compatible with the scenic quality or something like that. And so they were, and really all the interpretation without any guidelines. And the courts said you can't do that. So a decision called JAM Golf pretty much said towns can't do that anymore. You have to have more guidelines. So we were forced into going into adding, all right, what does it mean to talk about protecting the character of the area? What does it mean to have protect scenic quality? You know, just we've got to put some meat on the bones, not enough to make it objective, but enough so that way a reasonable person who's an applicant can make a decision as to whether or not it appears they would meet or not meet that requirement. And so that's kind of what's happened over time. Is you could get away with that in the past with, you know, 5 sentences. Now we've got a design review guideline and 15 pages of regulations. But really, in the end, what the hope is that there's enough there for a board to make a decision that they could point to and say, no, you don't meet this requirement, or yes, you meet all these requirements. And the requirement enough that's there for an applicant to be able to look and say, I know what I need to do to get an approval.
I think it's also important. You've got to be you've got to be a microphone and introduce yourself, because the minutes will be taken from somebody listening to the recording.
I'm Martha Smirsky. I'm one of the members of DRC. I think it's important to follow up what Mike was just saying, and also speaks to your question about subjectivity. There is some subjectivity in this, but remember that we're dealing with a board, and each of those members has a different idea and can explain that idea, so that you're not getting one person's unilateral charge of what that is.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really important piece.
Great.
And I'm sorry, how many members are on the committee?
So it's 5 regular seats, 2 alternates. So you need 3 for a quorum.
Occasionally people get anytime you have a board like that, you have people who might get disqualified for conflicts of interest being nearby, so you always have extra ones. Look, I see Gabe's hand is up too. And then we'll have Steve.
Yeah, hi. This is Gabe Lajeunesse. I'm a member of the Planning Commission, and I'm sorry I joined a little bit late. I'm traveling in a different time zone, but I could have missed. But have we had a discussion about the map of where the design review district is? I think if you go to most communities that have as significant a historic district as we have, you're going to see very similar kinds of guidelines, right? I mean, we want to maintain that character and whatnot. But to me, there is a good question about how far does that design review district extend? Can it be shrunk somewhat? And I don't know if I missed that conversation, the logic for why it is where it is today, or anyway, I apologize if I missed that.
I can answer a little bit of the history question because I had to put this together for a lawsuit that never happened. So the original design review district, and under state law, there are two different buckets you can be in. You can be a design review overlay district, or you can be a historic design review district. And we are not actually a historic design review district. We are a design review overlay district. So we actually chose not to be a historic district, but at the same time, we regulate historic within that. So it's a little confusion, but we are actually just a design review overlay. And the initial intent was really to focus in 1970s was really to focus just on our downtown, Main Street, State Street. And then over time, 1980s, there were like 3 or 4 amendments where things were added, like out to Redstone and then out and then down Berry Street a little bit. And then, so different areas were added on over time, including a discussion probably in the early 90s to add in National Life and that whole area of the Western Gateway. And really it was to reflect, can we make sure that as areas are developed and built out, that they're going to have to go through a design review process. Now, we didn't end up having much development up at National Life, but that was the intent, was that we want this area covered so that way it could be reviewed. But it is true that I don't know if there's necessarily a logic at this point that you could point to that would say, why is National Life in design review, but X is not? There are plenty of areas we could go through and say, why not Route 302? Why not River Street? There are a lot of areas we could make that same argument that was made for National Life and the Western Gateway. Why not the Eastern Gateway? So getting to Gabe's point, I don't know if there is a logic. Certainly we could make it smaller. And there was a discussion early in the process of redeveloping these rules in maybe 2019, where we talked about, should we make design review district match the historic district boundary and just focus on that? And that we had a conversation with historic preservation to decide, do we just shrink it down? And it wouldn't necessarily just shrink it down, because it actually would make it bigger. A lot of the historic district is not covered, but
it would cover, if you matched it with the National Register Historic District boundaries, you would actually pull in a whole bunch of residential neighborhoods.
And that was the reason why most of the design review overlay district focuses on commercial or predominantly commercial properties. Because there's an added set of costs and requirements to meet these requirements. And, the question is that fair to put that burden on a residential single family property owner? And so the decision has been in the past, you certainly can, as the city, we have the authority to, but we haven't in the past. And it's primarily because if it's primarily residential, especially single family or duplex, these small residentials, that it wouldn't be appropriate. They don't have access to grants. Commercial properties, our downtown is in the designated downtown. They qualify for historic tax credits. They qualify for a lot of things. So we might say you're required to do this, but you have access to grants to help cover some of those costs.
Okay, so just so that I can make sure I understand, originally state and Maine, and then over time, because the city wanted to review more, we added more, but it doesn't have to be that way. We could go back to a state and main if we wanted to, right? We could do that and that would still meet all the requirements of a designated downtown and all those things.
The only requirement is we have to cover all the properties in the designated downtown, which does go down Berry Street and does include some other property. So that is a requirement of the designated downtown program that you must have a design, either a historic design review or a design overlay district. So
Okay.
we can't
Thanks.
eliminate it in those areas.
Thanks, Mike.
Yep.
And this is kind of reminding me of that kiddie pool discussion that we had earlier. I mean, that was in relation to residential, this hypothetical situation of residential property in a design review overlay and this, all of these considerations that we have with the facade of structures and making sure that everything is compliant with the charm and vibe of the downtown district. So anyways, it's very interesting. It's helpful to hear people's perspectives of why things are regulated as explicitly as they are. And if anybody has heard of like any residential properties that have been caught up in the design review overlay district. I think Mike just brought a good example of, okay, yeah, maybe they have to comply with something and they don't have the same access to grants. But yeah, has this negatively impacted residential properties?
I mean, there are plenty of residential properties that this does apply to. I mean, the district hits the properties up and around the State House, for example. I can't say if they negatively impact. I mean, they go through the design review committee. So yes, there's if it's just a design review, that's the only reason the permit's being triggered and it's not for building code compliance. It is $130 for the design review committee and the permit recording fee. And they get the guidance. I don't know, there's a step they have to go through. There is a hoop. So that would potentially be negative. Have I had somebody say that means they can't do their project? I haven't had that happen.
Okay.
So that's my perspective on it.
Yeah.
I'm sure there's others.
No, it's helpful to have, like, okay, yes, I remember 10 people that this happened to were like, no, I don't remember this.
I haven't had
having this
anybody
discussion.
had that happen and then not go through the process because they had to go through the design review committee.
Yeah, well, that's great. Thanks.
Are there folks that would like to speak? Yeah.
Hi, my name's Steve Everett, and I'm on the design review committee. I think the two key words are, one, we're advisory, and number two, guidelines. Guidelines are just that, guidelines. And I think that even though there's some of the decisions are subjective, that we have a diverse group on our committee. We have an architect, attorney, people with deep experience in historic preservation. We have a contractor and somebody who's actually done some development. And when we look at a project, again, we use the guidelines and sometimes it's a challenge because you're dealing with people with new technology who want to put solar panels on a 200-year-old building, or somebody who wants to mount compressors or heat pumps. And I mean, the list goes on. So the trick is to try to upgrade an historic property. Most people who own historic properties want to preserve them. So they're very interested in doing what they can to make an addition or a change compatible so it doesn't stick out like a sore thumb. And as far as cost goes, based on the group's experience and some of the recommendations, I've actually had two people thank me on behalf of the whole group for saving. One guy saved $20,000 on a project, significant project, because of some recommendations that were made.
Hmm.
And we've had other people who've had similar experience. I don't know that there's been anybody who had any significant increase in cost for their project. The only issue with increasing cost is inflation. The cost of building materials and labor is, in the last 5, 6 years, is just incredible.
Mhm.
And I think that's what slows down more development than anything else. Trying to find a project that you can afford to do, and if it's an investment, is there going to be enough of a return to even cover it?
Yeah.
So again, there's the challenge, to build something that's reasonably priced so that it makes sense. If you have any questions, I'll be glad to answer.
This is like an subjective question, but do you or anybody else here see any or come across any sort of tensions between housing and new housing development, or building more housing in Montpelier, and historic preservation? It's a kind of a big wide of
Same question. That's a good question.
I'd have to answer that project by project.
Yeah.
I don't think there's a general statement you could make that could answer that question.
Yeah. And then I'm also curious if you would have any recommendations to us in terms of any changes to geography or otherwise regulations, or if it feels like things are in a good space in terms of the overlay district and design review for moving forward with housing developments in this area.
Can I cut you off real quick?
Yeah,
I don't want to get ahead of you. I just want to note that the agenda has like two subparts to this discussion. The first is the review, and then there's the second, discussion of areas to consider changing.
Excellent.
And I just want to make sure that I want to finish the review of the chapter and get that done. Your question's great.
Yeah.
I just don't want to get things too muddled.
Jumping in.
So I was just going to ask if there's any more questions that we might have for Meredith or anybody else, so that we have a good grasp on chapter 220.
Sean has his hand up.
Okay.
And I think
And
Gabe
does
hand
too.
might still be up from before.
All right.
Well, I'm sorry, I'll put it down.
I do have one question. How long does it usually take somebody to navigate a project through design review? Like, does it take a month? Does it add 2 months? 3 months? How long?
Yep. So the design review committee meets, as long as there's applications, they meet twice a month, just like the development review board, 2 Mondays a month. And as long as I have the application for the design review committee about 10 days before that meeting, and the meeting isn't completely full, which these days doesn't happen, they get on that meeting. So, there's like a 10-day pause from the time they get me what I consider a complete application till they go before that design review committee meeting, get their input. As long as there aren't, changes or additional information that they need to provide to me after that design review committee meeting, once that meeting happens, like the next day, we get moving on finishing processing their zoning permit. And it could be that their permit is issued the day after the meeting for the zoning. There might be some things they have to pull together for a building permit if a building permit applies, but it really doesn't hold things up much at all. I mean, we're talking maybe a 10-day pause in how everything goes together, because I have to get the design review committee's recommendations before I do any kind of next steps. It's not long at all. Occasionally, the design review committee will ask an applicant to come back to their next meeting because there's something that they dug in on their application and there's something missing, some detail. They want to see something, maybe tweaked a little bit for the design. But that doesn't happen that often.
Okay, thanks.
Mhm.
I don't have any other questions about the
Oh, okay. Hi, Eric.
I'm Eric Gilbertson. I've been chair of the Historic Preservation Commission for 20 plus years. But to answer your question, the Aubuchon building was one of the big houses that sat vacant for years, and that is largely a historic preservation project. It was funded by money from the Preservation Trust of Vermont, by the Housing Conservation Board. I don't know if they were able to take the tax credits because that's for profit organizations, but there is a 20% tax credit available for somebody who wants to do it, but they have to meet preservation standards, the Secretary of Interior standards to do that. One of the things I wanted to do tonight, a little perspective about historic preservation and design review in Montpelier. And I think it really kind of began with the proposed demolition of the Pavilion building in 1972. And people realized that this was an important part of the streetscape in Montpelier, which was a very advanced idea in 1972. And they objected to that. And what the architect came back with, Bob Burley came back with, was the idea of reconstructing the building. And I've been in historic preservation for a long time, and that's probably the best reconstruction I've ever seen. I wouldn't ever impose those requirements on people, but they even cast the bricks in a size to match the original, so that and they reused parts of the wooden and parts of the stone trim. So yeah, that's, I think, kind of an important thing. The other thing I want to do, a little story I wanted to tell was, I believe in 1993, I hosted a board meeting for the National Conference of State Historic Preservation Officers in Montpelier. And these are people that were in historic preservation and working with downtowns all over the country. And there were probably 40 people that came. I told them, you're not going to need your car in Montpelier. We'll pick you up at the airport. And they all came back and parked their cars for 3 days. But it was the first meeting hosted at the Pavilion. Fred Bashara took over the Pavilion building. But, here's a group of professionals that were blown away by Montpelier, by the downtown, by the neighborhoods. And I think, if you drive through Montpelier in the last few days and see all the people on the street, I think it's something that is pretty hard to find in the country, and it's an intact downtown. And a number of different projects have contributed to that, and it's been historic preservation money. Obviously an advocate for historic preservation. I worked for the state for 30 years, and then for the Preservation Trust for another 15. But I think, and maybe Mike and Meredith can help me with this, but I think the standards and the guidelines why the Planning Commission asked the Historic Preservation Commission to draft up those, I'm not quite clear on yet, but I don't have to be. But I think the quality of the applications has improved because of that, because people can go to those guidelines, and that's really a tutorial in historic preservation. And people can use that aren't necessarily doing, don't require to do it. It's a good guideline for design and paint colors, examples. And so it's useful to the broader residential communities. And I think it helps people make good applications.
Mhm.
And I think with signs, I think Steve would agree with me that the sign makers have really figured out how to fit signs in Montpelier that meet the guidelines. and acknowledge the historic character of the downtown.
Absolutely.
And so the review process and, in the neighborhoods in Montpelier, people are no longer just painting their houses white or brown or whatever. They're respecting the architectural features of the building. And I don't think that paint colors need to be reviewed. I have one exception to that. I do have a recommendation in that regard. And you probably guess it's a TD Bank North building, which is now a giant corporate logo. And it's the garish colors. There used to be a gas station there, but the design of the building, had they painted over the brick that was there that actually tied, the building kind of in a design wise with the downtown. And what my recommendation would be that commercial properties be subject to the color review. I don't think we need it in the residential neighborhood. Things seem to be working out pretty well. People look at a nice house and say, "Hey, I want to do my house that way." And so there's a lot of good examples. And the interest in preservation in Montpelier has been around the first, the Montpelier workbook that was done in the mid-70s. It guided, some good guidelines in there. But the ones that are most recently done, Brandy Saxton was contracted with a CLG grant, and it's part of a grant program that the city of Montpelier is a certified local government. So, and that we funded the guidelines, and most recently we funded the historic preservation scoping study, which I'd suggest is a fascinating read, if nothing else. The goal was to kind of identify historic resources that weren't on the register, that weren't listed, so that the Preservation Commission could have some kind of guidelines to move forward with any nominations or whatever. But there's fascinating historic pictures and maps of Montpelier in there. It's a long read. I think it's 67 pages long, but at least my paging did that way over what she was paid in the kind of work, and it provides a good plan for historic preservation. And kind of interesting, in a state where I worked, historic preservation was in a development agency. Wait a minute. But historic preservation is really not about pickling buildings and saying you can't change buildings. And if you look at the tax credits and the Secretary of Interior standards, it's about developing historic resources. And I think the Abishon building is a good example of that. One would hope the post office will be
Right.
Housing. And I think, we've had some kind of informal discussions about that. There's a good write-up about why it's significant architecture. David Coleman did. He used to be at the state office. He's now heading the historic preservation program at UVM. But I think that there's a lot of compromises that could be made in that building in terms of structure that could save the facade. It's a rather distinctive facade, whether you like it or not. It's distinctive, and it is historic. So, and I'm happy to answer any questions you have. I sit on design review as well. So
This is super helpful. Thank you.
Eric, did you want to just comment on just real briefly, the rules our design review rules could have been based on, like, there's rehabilitation, and there are a number of levels of national parks, and we chose one. We didn't chose the dump it in amber and leave it there forever. We
a set of standards for restoration.
Yeah, it was the restoration standards,
which are very rigid.
Yeah.
You know, if you're restoring a building, you're restoring it. It has to be exactly the same. And then the standards, what I think you're talking about, Mike, is standards for rehabilitation. And that allows some flexibility and judgment to meet the standards. And one of the things I've been doing regulatory stuff for a long time. And one of the things, I don't think you can write regulations where eventually human judgment isn't involved. The regulations would not be 3 pages long, they'd be 300 pages long if you tried to cover every situation. So you're always going to have the committees, whether it's Design Review or Historic Preservation Commission or the DRB, that are going to make a judgment on that. And that otherwise it just wouldn't work. And I think that the guidelines and the standards now are very understandable, and they're really based on national standards that have been around for a long. The Secretary of Interior standards for historic preservation projects. So there's lots of information, backup information, which is all referred to with a click in the guidelines. And thanks a lot for inviting us.
Thanks for coming.
Have a meeting. I haven't been in City Hall for a long time.
So yeah, I just wanted to make sure you guys knew that, there are various levels of those standards, and we chose the rehabilitation standards very consciously and specifically because it has the flexibility built in. It also provides the ability for someone who's coming in from away. So if you happen to be a Burlington architect and you come in, Meredith can go through and say, oh, if your building is this, our rules generally follow the historic preservation rehabilitation standards, and they'll know what that means and what that's going to require. So it by basing it on the National Park Service criteria, it helps to allow other people from other places, architects coming in from other places, to really have an idea of what this is going to require if they happen to be working on a historic building.
And in the spectrum of the sort of regulatory regime, from one being the restoration standards, which are very rigid, to I don't know what the other end of the spectrum is. Where do the rehabilitation standards fall in that spectrum? Do we know? I'm just trying to get a sense of.
Bob, you might, I don't know if Bob has the best way.
I'll just say this is all really helpful, and I'm just.
I'm Bob McCullough, and I'm also a member of the Preservation Commission. Rehabilitation is probably the most liberal of the standards. Restoration is more strict. Rehabilitation means that an old building needs to be adapted to a new use in order to survive. Buildings that don't have an economic use don't stand for very long. And so rehabilitation is intended, or it means that the building is going to be changed, converted to a new use. That's the basic heart of the rehabilitation standard. Let's come back to your comment on the subjectivity in words, and use the word rhythm. It sounds counterintuitive, but the words that are in the guidelines that were drafted very carefully are intended to minimize as much as possible subjectivity. An example of a very subjective guideline would be a guideline that says a new building shall be compatible with the old building. What does compatibility mean? We don't know. But if we say that compatibility shall be measured by considering rhythm of fenestration, patterns of street frontage, roof height, roof shape, those add clear guidelines or clear measuring sticks that help us winnow out as much of the subjectivity as we can. So, okay. That's why the guidelines that Montpelier has adopted are so detailed. There was an effort to and again, this sounds counterintuitive, the more detailed they are, the more structure is given to the process for making decisions.
Mhm. Thank you.
Yeah, and I think that's discussion is a really good segue into moving into the subsection B of the agenda item, which is a discussion on areas to consider changing. And I think it sounds like we're at that point in the discussion. So, Tim, I know you had a question before. I don't know if you want to just repeat it or if you feel like it was addressed. I don't even remember what
Well,
it
I had
is.
two questions, and I think that all this discussion has sort of maybe helped to answer that first one, which was about any sort of tensions between housing development and historic preservation. And my guess is that there like could be potentially some tension, but that generally we haven't experienced that. I think the example of the Aubuchon building is a really good one where the second and third floors, I believe it was, were empty for many, many years. They have now been developed into housing. So that's not a tension that appears from my perspective, to not be a tension at all. That historic preservation and new housing development can go hand in hand. That's sort of my summary of that first part. And then my second question was, I think what we're getting into next, was if there are recommendations from folks that are here in terms of any changes in terms of geography or zoning regulations when it comes to the overlay district. Yeah, I think that's within our jurisdiction, right? Both the geography and the overlay district specs within the zoning regulations.
You can probably tell I'm not trying to speak. But I think that the overlay district map should be reviewed every once in a while. I was looking at it just getting ready for this meeting, and I kind of wondered why all that area up at National Life should be in it as a design review. National Life has since completely refaced their building and done that. And if that's in design review, shows jail's called. We just to jump in on something. Be a bit I don't necessarily advocate for that.
Sure.
But I think reviewing the district, do we want to, our core, do we want to, one example would be looking at the corridors that come into town. And Elm Street is a pretty active corridor coming into town. Has some really nice historic buildings. The Meadow is on Elm Street. Is that a possibility that there should be design review along Elm Street? But I don't necessarily think that's something that every so often that map should be reviewed. Because it really is a benefit to Montpelier to have design review. So, thank you. Yeah, I did want to say something. That Meredith and Mike have been such great helps to me as the chair of the Historic Preservation Commission in developing the guidelines, statutes. It's just it's very nice to work with people like that.
Excellent.
I think one of my questions or thoughts, I didn't see the word solar panels get brought up in these regulations. Maybe I missed it, but yeah, kind of curious if we're talking about the facade. I know that solar panels were mentioned as potentially kind of interrupting the historical facade. I'm thinking also about like EV car charging ports, things like that. I mean, that's not talked about in here, but thinking about residential structures and maybe this potential tension of trying to make clean energy more accessible to residential development in these design review overlay districts, but also coming up against some limitations. So I don't know if that's something discuss. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So,
Yeah.
yeah. So quick reminder, design review is everything outside on the outside. So not just the facade, which in zoning speak and design review speak is the front part of the building or the parts of the building that face the street. So it's everything on the outside, including on the roof. And new fences, new exterior like structures, things like that can all come into design review. And yeah, the solar panels on a roof, it comes in under new like utilities or new things being put on a roof if it's not otherwise just exempt from zoning altogether. There are lots of categories of solar installations that are just exempt from zoning, period, which means they never get to the design review aspect. If they do come in, I mean, we had a project come before design review just a few meetings ago where it was somebody putting new solar panels on, I think it was a historic structure on the roof on a home. And there were just, questions about, how they were angled, and wasn't, I don't think there were any tweaks, there were some questions about it, but there were no changes made. The only changes that I remember being made were actually because of fire code. The fire department needed to have them moved away from the edges of the roof so they could actually get ladders up there. So, those are the things that come in. If there's a new solar carport, that's gonna go through design review, but that's because it's a new carport.
Yeah, I
You
guess
know,
I
so
guess I was
those
looking
are-
at solar carport. I was thinking, just like residential EV
Yeah,
chargers
some
that
of
are
those are now exempt
okay. Awesome.
I think
From zoning altogether.
from zoning altogether. If it's associated with a parking space, we're not those, if it's an exterior charger, that's going to be more of a building permit issue and a safety issue.
Okay. Perfect. Yeah, I mean, it sounds like solar panels and the EV stuff is a moot
Yeah.
point when it comes to what we're talking about.
And a lot of the utility items, if they're on side or rear elevations of a house, it's just administrative design review. So I look and say, are you sticking it right in the middle of some really gorgeous, unique decorative trim? If you're not doing that, then it gets approved as long as it's fine with the building permit.
Does heat pumps also kind of fit into the
Yep.
utility type of thing? Okay.
Yeah, we approve those all the time, and we say, hey, can you just stick it on the side or the rear? And if that works, then there you go.
Okay. Perfect. Thank you.
So I actually have a question for you, Meredith, which is, since we have since the current regime where we have moved towards administrative, since you're the administrative officer, you're handling the bulk of these now. I'm just curious, like just a broad 30,000 foot overview, like, do you find that the current state of play in terms of like handling handling it administratively, is that a success generally? Do you find it to where's the greatest efficiencies that you've seen in terms of having that process as opposed to the old DRB process? And along with that have you found any sort of kind of inefficiencies or places for improvement within the current system? I mean, I get the sense that it is a vast improvement, both in terms of just the administration of these permits generally and for developers as well. But I just want to get your sense of.
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't here before there was administrative design review, period.
Mhm.
Right. So there was a time where anything that went through the everything that was in design review had to go through the design review committee.
Right.
And anything that went to the design review committee then had to go to the development review board to get
Right.
checked off on a consent agenda. So that was a ridiculously slow process, and it just added reams of administrative work just to create the agendas and the packets. So luckily that was killed off before I started. But even since I started, things have become administrative. And it's, yeah, I mean, I think it's a lot quicker. We haven't, there are fewer things on the design review committee agendas. I think the last couple of years especially, it's not that there are fewer projects, it's that there's more things that are approved administratively. And so the design review committee has, 2, maybe 3 things per agenda instead of 5 or 6, and trying to fit that in an hour and a half. So I think the efficiencies have definitely gone up.
And then on the flip side, is there any, just in terms of when you process all these applications, and so it's,
I mean, there's a zoning assistant, so really, the really simple check boxes are the zoning assistant items. But yeah, that's a hard one for me I'm still kind of in the thick of it with us with the administrative subdivision and more administrative site plan reviews coming in. I don't know as I have enough of I don't know as I step back enough to look and see if there's more things.
Yeah, no,
Sorry.
No, I get it. It's hard to separate the forest from the trees a lot of the time.
Yeah,
That
I mean,
makes
there's places where I've been in it enough to be able to do that, and I don't know if I can step out of it enough to
No.
bring up more efficiencies right
No,
now.
I appreciate that. I appreciate that. And I guess I would just reach out to those of you who are, members of the committee and whatnot. If I'll have the same question, which is, now that a lot of this is handled administratively within the city staff, do you find that, are there changes that you wish were there changes to that process that you think would prompt greater involvement from the committee that you think would be helpful? I'm just trying to get a sense of what's working with the current system, procedurally.
One of our goals when we looked at statutes and the guidelines is to make as clear as possible kind of administrative changes that can be made. It saves everybody work and time, and saves applicants money. And I think that's worked pretty well. I haven't seen anything happen. We have a good administrator. Maybe if we had not a good administrator, this wouldn't work so well, but it works well. I think those kind of exceptions just make the process so much simpler. Design review meets twice a month. So that means, 2-week delay and an answer to a question that might be very simple.
But I think we'll also look at, and I think Eric pointed this out, make sure we keep an eye out for either projects that have happened that we kind of look at and say, the color of the TD North building, that's one where it gives us an opportunity to say, how many other bad projects or bad outcomes have we had? And those can sometimes show where we might need to adjust our rules, but also the developers have obviously been in to talk to us about projects that have not happened as a result of regulations. I haven't heard too many of comments of design review rules where developers have said that. We've obviously heard a lot about the site plan process and the subdivision process and appeals and certain design or certain dimensional requirements that could be adjusted to improve. But I haven't heard a lot, but certainly we should take a look at the color requirements when we get there to see whether that's something we want to take a look at. Because I've heard not just from Eric, but from members of the public that were aghast at the color selection. And that's worth it. I used to say it would be great to go and name regulations after the reason why they're there. So that way,
the Domino's
these people
pizza,
go,
right?
why do we have this? Well, that's because of the the TD Bank North color requirement that was put in place in 2025, and they can be immortalized in our regulations in that way. And the poor Domino's pizza sign was
Yeah.
actually an error on
Yeah,
our
that
part.
is.
But yes,
Sorry to bring up this.
yes, bring up painful reminders of. But yes, those are always good opportunities to look at. Can we look out there and say these are things that we wish hadn't happened, and if we had the correct review, maybe we could have made a difference in that. In some cases, you can't. If somebody wants to thumb their nose at the system, there's only so much we can do.
Go ahead.
Well, technically, I'm not
No, you-
staffing this.
Okay.
So just sort of a reminder about paint color in the TD North building. So right now, paint color is not regulated, right? As long as your building has already been painted previously, you can repaint it whatever color you want under the regulations. The only reason paint color came up before design review committee for that TD Bank building is because they requested painting over unpainted brick. Right, which if you use the wrong kind of paint, if you don't do it the right way, can actually degrade the brick and cause a lot of problems. Same with like if you're doing over stone, other unpainted surfaces. And so because we don't regulate color, that was my guidance to the committee that they could decide whether or not TD Bank could paint it. But the color really wasn't part of one of the things I could put as a condition. And they did give some thoughts on color, but I couldn't put that down as a condition. And so it's just, I know it's a finesse minor point, something to think about for future, whether you want to dive into that or not. It's just one of those funky little items.
Yep. Great.
I'm wondering if we can revisit the geography a little bit. And you were alluding to one of the reasons that National Life was included in maybe the Western corridor. But yeah, it's a huge. I mean, it's a huge property. It's a huge single parcel that is the National Life. And then it's interesting to think about the other parcels that are right along the roadway, which are State of Vermont and Green Mountain Power and the City of Montpelier, which is the high school.
Yeah. So
I'm actually going to go to a different map that's got the full parcel map since we're going to get into detail.
yeah, so on the one side, I'll mention also that Congress for New Urbanism, CNU, and AARP, one of their recommendations, they reviewed our regulations a few years ago. One of their recommendations were expand the design review overlay and use that as a basis to eliminate density requirements. Because as long as you have good design, density doesn't matter. And our regulations, they felt, were very good design review regulations, and therefore they could be used to substitute any density regulations. So we've had this conversation before of, do we want to have these density? Now we've kind of increased it to 6, but
We actually put that exclusion in. There's no residential density
Yeah.
limits in the design
But
review
for-
overlay
for
district.
making it bigger though.
Yes,
For
I wanted to make
argument,
sure that
what Congress for New Urbanism wanted was to basically start to expand our design review regulations throughout the city and then eliminate the density requirement throughout the city, because as long as we have good design, we don't need to have the density requirement. So just putting that on the table as that was a comment that was made. The requirements here really kind of built out, and I think sometimes we forget, we look back. I don't know exactly when the interstate was built through, but sometimes these guys are talking about making changes in the 1980s, and at that time, people living there in the 70s and 80s, when these design review regulations were put in and then expanded, were reflecting a change in the fact that the interstate highway was built through in late 60s, early 70s. So it's from a 1980s perspective, fairly recently. So they're like, wow, this has just come in. Everything is changing. Maybe we need to protect this corridor up near the interstate. And So there's kind of that thought. Because they didn't protect Route 2 back to Middlesex on the other side of the river. There was just really that interstate exchange. I think things are different now, and it may be a little bit of these are all in big parcels. They're all owned by corporate. They're not, getting to your question, could we remove them? It's a policy question. Yeah, I think we could. Because I think we have a lot of other rules in effect, but again, it's a policy decision as to how much or how little. And again, it could stay there and not make a difference because they're not developing anyway. So
Right.
And I'll just say it was 5, 6 years ago. We had the big maps. At some point, we visited this question
Yeah.
5 or 6 years ago. We had big maps that we lay them out and we kind of taped them up. And we discussed that very issue. And if I remember correctly, the decision we came to was very low risk that anything was going to happen on that parcel.
Yeah.
So keep it in just in case something, you know, significant happens there.
Mhm.
We just felt it was such a low risk kind of proposition that
Sure.
we kept it in. But we ultimately sort of fell back on it's always been there.
Yeah.
So why rock the boat?
Yep.
Um,
Yeah. I think that's fair.
so I think my computer died,
Oh,
just so you know.
okay, thank you.
It's been acting funny, but I can't do anything at this
all right,
point.
meeting's over.
Having a bad
Next
day.
computer is
That's
done.
it.
So sorry.
Just if there's if she's got to look for
Yeah.
anyone, if there's
Yep.
anybody on Zoom or
I don't
with a
see
hand up.
hands.
Just so I can't see anybody anymore.
But to your point, Tim, I agree. I think it's worth taking a look at sort of just the overall maps and what the geography is, because I agree. I think it's worth revisiting that every once in a while. And like I said, it's been 5 or 6 years since we've done that, and there's obviously been a number of changes in the city since then. So, is there anything else anybody wants to discuss with respect to consideration of any changes to this chapter? And obviously, we can revisit this at a later meeting, but I just wanted to check to see if anybody has any burning questions or comments. Oh yeah, please do, please do. And I just wanted to say, before we end this, I just want to say thank you very much, everybody who's here tonight. It's been really helpful to have this sort of resource. And I'll warn you right now, don't be surprised if we reach back out to you at a later date to sort of ask some follow-up questions as we really take a deeper dive into this chapter. But again, I just want to thank you very much for all the work and dedication you've had in this area. It's been really instructive for us as we're taking a new look at this. So thanks again.
I just wanted to make a comment about expanding the area that design review covers. I think it's really important. I'd like to see it personally. I'd like to see it expanded into the corridors into the city, because that is our first impressions of the city from each area, coming into Elm Street, coming down Northfield Street, coming off the interstate, all of those. I think it's important because of the way that it establishes our flavor. And that's just my comment. I do need to leave, but I wanted to say that before I could.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, sounds like we're set with this issue for tonight. Thank you very much. There's one more sort of substantive issue on the agenda. That's ethics training.
Should be really short. Under the new state laws that went through, the committees, certain committees are required to go through and do the online ethics training. And I have been negligent in pushing you guys on it as we were going through the final city plan updates, and then I forgot about it. So shame on me. But knowing that we're starting a new cycle, October 1st is our new year with the new members. I think we're going to have a 7th member showing up next week, so that'll get us back to full because we do have an applicant. And so with that, we just wanted to go through and remind everybody that you need to do the ethics training and then let us know when you've done it so we can get it marked down, just so that way if somebody does make some complaint at some point, we've got the ability to go through and demonstrate that we have asked you to do the training. Doesn't take long. It's pretty straightforward.
You can actually speed up the set standards of them talking to you. And the quizzes there's quizzes you have to do, really easy. And when you sign in, you can put in either Mike's or my email address to get a copy of the confirmation that you get so that you don't then have to do anything. And I'm actually keeping track of those for all of the committees that the planning department does and putting together a chart. So, because it's do it once and then it's again every 3 years thereafter.
Great.
About how long is it?
The website says 45 minutes.
Yeah, you can
But
speed that up.
But
You-
don't.
You can speed that up.
Yeah.
I mean, it does, if you actually listen to the whole thing, I also had somebody whose video froze and timed out, and she just went ahead and answered all the quiz questions and got them all right. And so that was it. Cool.
Great.
So we'll touch base and check in with folks later on. But we wanted to ask everybody to start thinking about it. And if you get a few minutes to kind of take some time and get that taken care of. And that's it.
Great. Thanks. Thanks again, everybody, for showing up. Really appreciate it. Last item on the agenda is adjournment.
I will motion to adjourn.
I will second that.
All right, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor of adjournment, say aye.
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 Any nays? The adjournment has it. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank
See
you.
you again.
Recording stopped.